Bible is often treated as if it appeared first, as if Christianity began with a finished book and everything else followed afterward. History tells a different story. The church existed before there was a New Testament. Christians were already worshiping, baptizing, confessing sins, fasting, and receiving the Eucharist long before anyone could hold a complete Christian Bible in their hands. For decades after Christ's resurrection, there was no fixed canon. There were letters and gospels circulating, preaching, and worship taking place, but no universally agreed upon list of inspired books. And yet, the church was not confused. The faith was lived before it was compiled. That alone challenges a modern assumption that Christianity rests on a book first and a church second. Historically, it's the other way around. The apostles did not hand the church a Bible and tell it to figure things out. They preached, taught, appointed leaders, and passed on what they had received. Some of that teaching was written down, much of it was not, which raises a crucial issue. When we say the Bible, we are already standing on a decision that had to be made. Which books belong, which do not, and who decides? Those questions were unavoidable in the early centuries. Many writings circulated under apostolic names. Some were faithful, others were confused or forged. Communities had to discern which texts truly carried apostolic teaching. There was no inspired table of contents, no verse listing the canon, no moment where scripture authenticated itself. Recognition required judgment, and judgment requires authority. The canon of scripture did not emerge through private study or individual consensus. It emerged within the life of the church, through worship, continuity with apostolic teaching, and councils that carefully weighed these texts against what had always been believed. The church did not create scripture, but it did recognize it, and recognition carries responsibility. This is where Sola scriptura begins to unravel, because scripture alone cannot tell you which books are scripture. At some point, something outside the text itself must be trusted. Whether acknowledged or not, that something is the church. Ask a simple question that rarely gets answered clearly. Why these books and not others? Why 4 Gospels? Why Paul's letters and not competing epistles? Why Revelation, which was disputed for centuries? There is no biblical verse that resolves this. Protestantism inherits a canon, but cannot consistently explain why that canon should be trusted, especially while rejecting the authority of the church that recognized it. Some will say, the early church got it right. But which church? The same church that defined the Trinity, the same church that defended Christ's divinity, the same church that preserved sacramental worship and apostolic succession. If that church was trustworthy enough to give us scripture, why is it suddenly unreliable everywhere else? That is selective trust. Orthodoxy does not face this contradiction, because orthodoxy never separated scripture from the church that received it, preserved it, and proclaimed it. The same church that defended the faith against heresy, defended the canon against false writings, and passed both on together. The councils did not invent doctrine or manufacture a Bible. They responded to confusion by safeguarding what had already been received and lived. Each council looked backward, not forward, to continuity. This becomes especially clear when we look at the Old Testament. The earliest Christians overwhelmingly used the Greek scriptures, the Septuagint, quoted by the apostles and woven into the language of the New Testament. This was the Church's Old Testament. Only later did parts of Christianity adopt a different standard, not because the Church changed, but because authority shifted away from the Church. Books read in worship for centuries were removed, not by councils, not by universal agreement, but by individual judgment. And that exposes the core issue. If the Church has no authority, then canon becomes opinion. If canon becomes opinion, then scripture becomes unstable. And if scripture is unstable, sola scriptura loses its foundation. Orthodoxy does not place tradition over scripture. It refuses to separate them. Scripture is tradition written down. Tradition is scripture lived and preserved. The Church is the body that holds them together. Remove one, and the others fracture. This is not about institutional control or intellectual dominance. It's about coherence. Without the Church Christ established, the Bible becomes a collection of sacred texts without shared memory. Interpretation becomes private. Meaning becomes negotiable. With the Church, the Bible has a home. It is read as it has always been read, prayed as it has always been prayed, understood in continuity with the faith that produced it. So the question is not whether the Bible is inspired. The real question is whether the Church that recognized it is trustworthy. Because without that Church, the Bible as we know it does not exist. And a faith built on Scripture alone ultimately rests on a foundation it cannot explain.